All right, welcome back. That was a nice, quick and short coffee break. We're continuing with day one of IDD 2019. Our next panel discussion will be exploring the status of financing for development from different institutional and policy perspectives, and it'll be moderated by Marcos Nito. Marcos, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I hope you managed to get your caffeine. We have a really good panel ahead in discussion from the point of view of public finance. I think we've heard a lot around today in terms of the need, not just for the private sector to come on board, but the need for public finance and the need for public finance management to happen properly, to allow private come in, but also to make the uses of public resources more efficient, as well as to bring in more public resources. And I think that's a little bit about what we are going to discuss today here, with an eclectic panel, with people from different parts of the world. And let me just briefly introduce you and then get going so we can hopefully bring you on board at some point during the panel. So we have Dr. Amna, which is actually a colleague of mine, in terms of we work together on a joint program, was a fiscal specialist with 2 decades of experience in tax administration, tax policy, and implementation of tax reform. She has held senior assignments in the government and the development sector. Currently the project manager for the joint UNDP OECD initiative, the Tax Inspectors Without Borders, which has been mentioned a couple of times, so you're going to find out more about that soon. In that condition, Amna is providing support to 36 developing countries to build capacity to enhance domestic resource mobilization. She has published in top 5 international research journals on the world and has a PhD in audit and accounting from the University of New South Wales. Then we have Erica from the European Union. You know, as Erica was pointing out to me, that she's the first donor provider that is speaking today. So it will be interesting to hear from one of the largest provider of aid in the world, I think the largest now, the perspectives on those aspects. Erica has been posted in Slovenia prior to the accession into Benin as an economic advisor in the EU delegation. She's been working in the European Commission Director General in charge of International Development Cooperation since 2003 on budget support as well as on human rights and democracy. She has been deputy head of unit for West Africa and then became the head of unit of the Central African region. She shortly led the unit in charge of financing for the development and development effectiveness. She is, since 2016, head of the unit budget support, public finance management, and domestic revenue mobilization. She supervises the budget support operations of the EU around 90 countries and responsible for the EU policy on PFM and DRM of EU external cooperation. Daniel Berg, which is, has since leaving EBRD after a 24-year career in 6 countries, has remained engaged in the Western Balkans, mostly Serbia and Albania, on issues surrounding impact investment. This includes reviews from the UN on finance alternatives for and obstacles to finance the SDGs in these 2 countries, but also have looked at potential to finance green investments and on general governance investment-related reforms. Now we have David, who has experience of working with a variety of organizations, including national banks, IMF, UNDP, NGOs, and the private sector. As a Deputy Minister of Finance for the Republic of Georgia, David was responsible for all the cooperation with donor community and management of public debt. Currently, Public Policy Sector Director at International Development Consulting Company, PMCG, David coordinates policy advice projects in more than 20 countries. Now, my good friend Usau at the end, who has a stepping in your agenda, you have Mr. Mustafa Turan. But Mustafa, which represents the Turkish government, had to go back to Ankara to accompany the UNDP administrator to meetings this afternoon in Ankara and tomorrow. So Usau was kind of thrown under the bus here to talk, but thank God he's been working with UNDP and the government of Turkey on the issue that Mr. Turan was going to speak, so we have a very good replacement in that sense. Usal brings experience from government, business, and international organization. His last post was an innovation director for the GE in Turkey, and he's leading his own consultants company now, and in that sense has been the leading person on the feasibility study of this SDG accelerator that we are establishing together with the Turkish government. So, as you can see, a great mix of people talking about the aspects of public finance management, which then complements all the conversations that we heard up to now and up to date. Let me start with Daniel. You know, you've been working in Serbia and Albania, and we've actually been working in these two countries with the UN in the issues of financing strategies for the SDGs. So tell us briefly what you found in terms of opportunities and challenges in these two countries, and how, in the specifically context of these two countries, how do they link to the accession to the EU issues in that sense?
Thank you. Very pleased to be here. And as you said, I have moved from the EBRD, which is obviously a very private sector-oriented development finance institution, to helping the UN and helping some other donor organizations on their financing strategies. In the past 12 to 18 months, both Serbia and Albania have gone through what we saw in the presentation earlier, the MAPS exercise that the UN leads, which I think is a very useful exercise because it's jointly done with the government and with a lot of the donor organizations on where are these countries on the roadmap towards achieving SDGs. And when I was there in both countries, certainly encourage both the donors both the donors. He did try to get me to do that earlier. Both the donors and the government to use this MAPS mapping exercise, as I like to call it. The EU accession in both of those MAPS exercises is core and built completely into the MAPS exercise, and then the program that the UN and the government worked out together for their 5-year program. So you have a very well-coordinated situation between the UN, the EU, and the government, and other donors, of course. It's not EU exclusive, but I think it's important that the strategies are tied to each other in a planning and strategy perspective. If they were not, you'd have too much going on, and there's not enough capacity in any one of these governments to manage a strategy of EU accession and a strategy of UN SDG issues, which are not at least aligned. So that's, I think, an important starting point. I think it's an important starting point for the whole discussion. Second thing about these two countries is they're both middle-income countries, which is different for both our SDG and our financing opportunities. If you go to a lower-income country, they're still able to gain a bit more traction on official development assistance, official development aid. Aid in these countries has been declining over the past years, except now a few donors, and the hope for increase in EU assistance as time moves forward and as they move into an accession mode. Both of them are looking to be accepted. Serbia has, and Albania is looking to start the accession negotiations. That would be some financing out there. But I think what's most important then is to take this strategy that's been developed, the mapping, the maps, the EU strategy, the availability of financing, and then we have to get into the discussion of how to use that money and how do you make the most bang for the buck. And I do think both countries need, and this is not just these countries, but all of the countries we're going to be talking about, need the assistance of preparation, implementation, and carrying out blending, because it's not simple. We heard the example in Samoa just before this, the example of bringing together ADB financing with Canadian trust fund money, with some political risk insurance, with private investment to get the most bang for the buck. I think if you look at the goal of the SDG mapping, you look at the goal of the EU accession, you look at the goal of the countries to bring the most development that they can get from the assistance available, you do need a real coordinated plan between various sources of finance in order to get the most bang for the buck. And it's not a simple process. It takes a lot of hands-on work. And I hope in this discussion we can talk both about the government's role in that and the donor's role in addressing those obstacles to using the money effectively.
Thank you. David, everything that we heard today does not happen in a vacuum, right? Political economy matters. You know, people's desires and needs for services matters in that sense, right? On your experience, from your perspectives, how can, you know, take in consideration those issues, budgeting and public finance management be improved to address the SDGs? What realistically can change, right, in the context of all the debt issues that we also heard and limited public fund, you know, and how do you manage those tensions in that sense from your experience?
Thank you. Probably I will repeat many of the speakers, and I would say that among many aspects that are necessary for successful implementation of Agenda 2030, leadership and coordination are the most important things we need to have in place. And when we speak about coordination, I agree with Daniel, it's about coordination between various actors who provide financing, but it's also about coordination within the government. So it is important that everybody understands, government officials as well as outsiders understand what are the main priorities of the country. In Georgia, we have created this coordination council like in other countries we're presenting today in the morning. And this coordination council has is trying to coordinate work of all line ministries, and we have developed a matrix of sustainable development goals which are nationalized with all the 98 targets and 204 indicators, and certainly all line ministries are involved, and also civil society is involved in the process. But so far there is not enough involvement of private sector and academia, and these matrices have not been translated really in the public finance. So when Ministry of Finances asks line ministries to provide their programs when the process starts in early February for the next year, there is a request that they describe how these programs are helping to meet sustainable development goals. But this is this process is not matured enough, and it is not really translated in real actions, which is changing the behavior of line ministries. And I guess it is a long way we have gone through to align different line ministry strategies with the sustainable development goals. I want to mention, you asked me about what can be changed, and I think I would put it in a different way. There are a couple of challenges I see, and one of them is about finding a good balance between comprehensiveness and prioritization. So, as I mentioned, we have 204 indicators. It's very difficult to monitor and evaluate success when you have so many indicators, and on the other hand, you want to do everything at the same time, and doing different things are helping each other. So to find a good balance between prioritization and comprehensiveness, I think is one important challenge, and you will be successful when you have many different priorities, but at the same time you are able to manage the process to reach these priorities. And second thing I wanted to mention regarding the challenges is that we are not ending the process, I guess, in 2030. So there is a life beyond 2030, and we need to process smoothly and achieve sustainable development goals in a sustainable manner. So I'll bring again Georgia's example. We started big reforms in 2003, and these reforms are very well recognized worldwide. But at that time, the priority was good governance and rapid economic growth. Over time, we decided that it is not only about rapid economic growth, but inclusive economic growth. Sometimes these things go hand to hand together, and SDGs can help to accelerate economic growth, but there are cases when there is some contradiction between sharing prosperity and faster growth. So, and in those cases, it is important to balance very well between the shared prosperity and sharing benefits among generations. So I think these are the challenges we need to also think about when we are addressing sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to a more perhaps concrete piece of work, which is the one that you've heard today, the Tax Inspectors Without Borders, which is a joint partnership between OECD and UNDP, trying to deal with the issues of, tax avoidance and issues like that. But I will I'm going to describe, perhaps to start a little bit, what the program is and how is it doing in that sense. But therefore, it will be important to, after you do a description of the project, how can global efforts to improve tax collection be expanded to support increasing revenue streams and improving financial sustainable development? So, and maybe if we can get a country, I think there's an opportunity to pick a country to describe how the Tax Inspectors Without Borders works in practice.
Sure. Thanks, Marcos, and good afternoon, everyone. There's been a talk of need for innovative tools for financing for development, and I think Tax Inspectors Without Borders is such a tool which came into being after there was a lot of discussion and a lot of demand for having, so a lot of developing countries had a lot of theoretical capacity building on how to do audits of international tax issues of transfer pricing, but there was a need on how do we actually practically do these things. So this tool came into being to actually bridge the gap between theory and practice, where we have experienced tax auditors go and work with local auditors of a country which is requesting support. They sit with them, they look at their confidential data, they have an oath of secrecy, they sign a no conflict of interest certificate, so they actually become part of that team, and they help them build their capacity by working on real life cases throughout the whole case. So they go every 3 months to the country requesting the support, work with the team, leave giving them some homework to proceed forward, are available for remote assistance, and are with them for 18 to 24 months, either remotely or on site, holding their hand, not substituting, but holding their hand and trying to transfer skills in a more sustainable way. The demand and the impact and the benefit that the countries are receiving from this initiative can be seen that we currently have about 63 programs running in 36 countries. And the short-term gains have been about $470 million that have been raised through this support while working on these audits of transfer pricing. But I think the challenge that we're finding here is in terms of, this development, sustainable development, is linking this domestic resource mobilization or the revenues collected here and linking them to how they're being spent. And I think being able to show that that money is actually being spent on, what the administrator spoke this morning of eradicating poverty, of development, of ensuring better, improved public spending, and that's where the challenge lies on how we can make that linkage and show it how that is happening. And I think part of it is by building more global efforts in terms of now we have a lot of international standards which are being adopted by countries. About 129 members have become part of the inclusive framework on base erosion and profit shifting, and about 154 are part of the Global Forum for Transparency. So once these countries adopt these standards, there's a need to support them to be able to implement that. There's a need to expand these global efforts and improve the way these countries can better collect their revenues by sharing best practices, by sharing experiences, by sharing a lot of information, which either it's an automatic exchange of information or it's an information on request by different tax authorities with each other to open up the space and work as one. And I think bringing the examples, and I think awareness raising of taxpayers, which can work in different ways. We had a program in Liberia with the Liberian Revenue Authority where it has a lot of mining and extractives industries are there. But the thing was that a lot of these multinationals were taking advantage of the fact that these tax auditors were not sure on how to audit them, how to audit the transfer pricing part of their transactions. And once they asked for a program, we sent an expert who was from the UK. And as the head of the tax administration, I'll quote her, she said, as the word got out on the street that there was support coming from London, all of a sudden all the taxpayers became proactively compliant because now they could figure out, there's someone helping them. And similar with Georgia, and you may be able to, share with us your views as well. We currently have a second Tax Inspectors Without Borders program. And the expert is from Belgium, who's again helping them formulate a risk assessment tool where they can risk assess these taxpayers better, as well as he's helping them draft the exchange of information requests. So this is, I think, how we can further expand. And I think it's time to move beyond the approach of whole of government to a whole of globe approach, where we all help each other build a more level playing field to ensure taxes are paid where they're due, so where the economic activity occurs.
And actually, since I knew that we will be on the same panel, I contacted my former colleagues at the Revenue Service and was asking, tell me a few things, what I can tell to AMNA, what needs to be improved, what they need to change. And the response was that tell them that we are going to ask for this third phase of assistance, so now on advanced payment actions.
That's true. We've already have some initial,
advanced pricing.
Yeah, advanced pricing agreements. So that's how we're progressing. So we first usually have a program which is building more general audit skills. The next one usually focuses on certain sectors, like in Georgia, we're focusing on the financial sector. And then the third one focuses on, more specific, like either it's advanced pricing agreements or things like that. So that's the progression of the RWE. So I'm glad to hear that from you, and we'll be very willing to be supporting you.
Well, one of the conversations we are having between UNDP and OECD is eventually, not too distant future, to actually move a little bit the tax inspectors without border to the issues of illicit financial flows. Because at the moment we are working in the avoidance area, the profit shifting, but as we heard a lot today, the issues of the illicit financial flows need to be tackled. We need to adjust it because of the complexities of it, but that is going to be another area we will look at, so keep an eye on the project. Erika, perhaps two questions. One, there's a lot of conversation about revenue comes and then how do you get it to be spent better? The European Union has a program, has a strategy called Collect More, Spend Better strategy. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about that strategy, help us understand what that is and how it's worked. And then, what is the larger EU approach to support countries with public finance management reforms in line of the SDGs, the IDD's agenda, and how does all of this link to the SDGs again? Again, this is the first time that we're having a large, aid provider, donor in the room, so keep that perspective, I think.
Thank you very much, Marco, for the introduction and for the invitation on this for this conference. I'm particularly happy to be here with you as representing the European Commission after the elections that we had yesterday. As President Juncker puts it, the second largest democratic process in the world. So we will see what the next days will bring. But this is again a pleasure for me to be here. And indeed, as a EU global player, we are a strong supporter of multilateralism, a strong supporter of the Agenda 2030, of the Addis Agenda, and of course of the Paris Agreement. Somebody said earlier today, this goes without saying. Well, today it doesn't go without saying, so I think it is better to say it. And as this global actor active in most of countries in the world, we are also collectively, that is EU institutions, together with our 28 member states, currently 28 member states, we are the biggest provider of official development assistance, with 57% of worldwide ODA reported to the DAC of the OECD provided by the EU. So that says about the figures. It's about 74 billion a year last year that was spent on official development assistance from the EU taxpayer. It's important to put it this way because it means also that the EU taxpayer wants some kind of, requires some kind of accountability with what happens with this money, and I will come to that. So what can we do with this ODA? What should we do? Leveraging has been used as a word often today already. Differentiating is also something that we need to do. There are different contexts, different countries, different levels of development, different needs. And it is true that what Mr. Steiner was putting it as being on the main road or being off road is a very important dimension of what can be done with official development assistance. We have specific targets set for least developed countries where ODA as grant money, I remind that all this is grant money, ODA as grant money is more needed in certain regions or in certain countries than it can be in others. This said, we also need to leverage because while we can say that 74 billion euros a year is important, it is still very far from the trillions that we are talking about. Therefore, this leveraging dimension is essential. But leveraging does not necessarily mean only having very sophisticated financial systems. Leveraging is the simple way of blending money, which the EU does quite a lot, in particular through the European External Plan, which some of you may be familiar with, whereby we put grant money on top of a project funded by a development bank and therefore leverage this funding. That goes very much into public infrastructure, actually. So this is not really that much about this private sector support, but really thinking the infrastructure needs are so huge, as has always already been said indeed, that this leveraging dimension is essential in order to finance infrastructure. For a long time, the EU has been financing infrastructure in grant money, simply building roads only with grants, and obviously this was not very sustainable and very efficient use of our ODA. Now, more and more, we are also using the guarantee mechanisms, and this is exactly aimed at indeed supporting private sector entrepreneurship and developing private sector financing tools, which goes also with what we call the third pillar of our external investment plan. The third pillar of the EIP is about business climate and business environment. You cannot pretend having a private sector growing into a country, whether it is foreign direct investment or domestic investment, if the business climate is not right for that private sector to grow and to invest. So this guarantee mechanism allows us to bring in another layer of guaranteeing over the risks that private sector take in investing in such environments. So this is really for the investment mechanisms. But as Marcus, you also said, public investment is essential and public policies are at the core of it. I think that we should not forget, in all the discussions that we've had since this morning, and the fact that we have been saying that the private sector role is essential. Yes, you can have the private sector working in education. You can have the private sector working in health, as has been widely expressed this morning during the panel of the ministers. But you need a regulatory framework. You need a public policy that frames how this private sector is going to engage into these public goods. And that is still the role also of official development assistance as public money and as public grant to accompany countries in developing and designing strong public policies and supporting the implementation of these strong public policies. And this is why the EU also provides grant budget support. We are the biggest provider as EU Commission, the biggest provider of grant budget support in the world. That means that we bring in money into the budgets of countries. Many of you are represented in this conference, whereby we say, you have a sound macroeconomic context, you work on your public finance, and you work on ensuring a stronger public finance management system, and you have strong public policies. We trust you in doing this, therefore we put the EU taxpayer money directly into your budget as if it was any other source of funding for your budget. It's a strong political act when we do that. It's a strong act of mutual confidence of bringing budget support, but it is a policy that the European Commission has sustained for now 15 years and is looking forward to continuing over the next phase. Now, of course, when we say to our taxpayer, we are putting money directly into the budget of a certain number of countries, the taxpayer, and that is in particular through the voice of the European Parliament, for which we voted yesterday, are asking, you're putting this money into these budgets. How is this managed? Okay, so then comes the discussion about public finance management, which I think was the initial question. When we look at public finance management, what do? We look at the willingness of a country to engage in public finance reform. We know that the systems are not ideal, otherwise we would not be necessary in the country. So the most important is the commitment of a government to actually improve the public finance system. We work with a tool that most of you probably know, which is the PIFA framework. PIFA framework is the tool that allows us, that allows countries, more specifically, to have a diagnostic of the entire chain of the public finance management, from budget decision-making processes until external audits through implementation, payment, etc., as well as domestic revenue mobilization. So the entire chain, and this is the only tool that is completely comprehensive on the whole public finance management. This is why we are strongly committed to this PIFA framework, which has been existing for more than 10 years now and is still providing very strong and good diagnostic tools in countries, as well as at local level. And we have not talked too much about cities since this morning. So that's the PIFA framework for which that we support and that we really engage countries to use to know what the situation is. And once we know what the situation is, and then we can have frameworks for the reforms put in place. Procurement processes are essential. We see that the risks that we analyze in the countries where we provide budget support, we see that the risk related to procurement is sensed as being as increasing. We need to be looking at procurement processes closely. There is another MAPS actually process, which is on public procurement, and that it also offers specific diagnostic on procurement. I will not go too much on the various tools that exist, but another last one that I would like to mention is the PIMA tool that we work with the IMF on infrastructure. Why is this so important? If we want banks or donors or private sector to invest in infrastructure, we need to have good projects. This has been said already in the previous session, and the good project is something that is a very wide concept, and the PIMA tool allows us, you to improve the quality of projects that can be proposed to financiers for financing. All this to say that what does this all contribute to? It contributes to fighting corruption. This is really essential that in all these processes, and again, as you know, we are putting the EU taxpayers' money into your budgets, that there is this sense that corruption is being fought. It is not acceptable to consider that 30% of infrastructure investment is lost because of a lack of efficiency, meaning or including corruption losses. It is something that exists, we know it exists, but it is also essential for every citizen to realize that there is something that is being done about it. I will not talk too much about domestic revenue mobilization, which is the collect more part of the equation, because I think that a lot has already been said. But one thing that is essential, it is not only about increasing the tax ratios in terms of rates, but it's also about the tax administration. A lot can only be done with the tax administration, and this is also what is being done with the efforts of various actors, the IMF, the OECD, the World Bank, with our support. As you know, indeed, and it has also been mentioned, the EU is has put together this list of non-cooperative tax jurisdictions. It can be criticized. It is at least a process that has started. There is a strong willingness from the EU institutions to fight tax evasions around the globe, and more should happen in the years to come in this. At the end of the day, what is important in order to make all this equation function, it is the country ownership. And this is really where the partnership has to happen. There is a lot of expertise in all the international organizations, the UN, the World Bank, the IMF, the OECD, ourselves have a lot of expertise in all these dimensions, and we are all committed to this agenda. But we need to put this expertise together around country strategies, and this country ownership at country level is sometimes not happening strongly enough, and it requires strong leadership from the country authorities. And it's only when there is this strong leadership from the country authorities that this can work in a way. The SDGs will require to be financed. This is the topic of this conference, and for that there is a need to have a strategy. How are you going to finance the path towards the SDGs? We believe that there is a need for a stronger and clearer discussion on that at country level. There was the Financing for Development Forum recently in New York, where the concept of the integrated national financial frameworks was put to the conclusions. We are working together with the international organizations on trying to bring this discussion around the INFF, Integrated National Financing Framework, at country level. Now, what is going to happen from the EU side in the years to come? Well, that is for the European Parliament that has just been elected to decide, but the European Commission has put on the table a proposal for a financing package of 123 billion euros for the next 7 years, which is an increase by 27% from the current financial framework. The EU is there to support development and cooperation around the globe. We are also trying to be innovative with these tools of blending and guarantees. But at the end of the day, everything happens in a country, and in the country that is well governed and where governance is strong can thrive better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's great to hear the way the EU is going, and we've been partners, and hopefully we'll carry on being partners on the integrated national financial frameworks going forward in that sense. Now, Usau, a lot has been talked about in this panel and in previously in terms of bringing private and public money together. Now, you've been involved here in Turkey on it's a concrete concept, is in, being deployed right now of an SDG accelerator, in which the Turkish government is bringing on some of its own resources to try to leverage and attract the private sector. So tell us a little bit about this concept and what stage you are in and where you see it going.
Sure, thank you. So the whole concept of SDG Impact Accelerator is actually based on the premise that the government financing, the public financing is not enough to tackle with the development challenges. However, it could be a guiding and catalyzing factor. So how we started this is actually based on a trend of growing impact investing as an asset class around the world. And there is an excellent panel tomorrow in this conference on impact investing. The reason why a lot of advanced country asset managers are investing into these, impact class is basically there are so many global challenges: climate change, immigration, the lack of good jobs. They are all systemic challenges to these people's assets, and they cannot diversify from them because wherever you go, you face these challenges. So at some point, the idea is to, invest in businesses that would tackle these challenges and, reduce your systemic challenge, systemic risk. And what we have observed is, as you have rightly mentioned, the entrepreneurs themselves are great, they are solution focused, they are action oriented, etc. But they also need guidance from the governments and from the larger policy framework on which challenges to focus on. They do not necessarily have the full information about the interactions between different issues around the world. So if someone could help them and catalyze their actions towards the right point, then this could be a great setting. And Turkey somehow emerged in our thinking as a great place to do this because, one, Turkey hosts 4 million refugees, and immigration is one of the biggest challenges now. And second, Turkey is a middle-income country, and a lot of impact investing is directed to low-income countries, yes, but there are challenges that, one, that could be solved in middle-income countries, second, that could be tried, and if the solutions work, could be scaled to, poor country settings. So as a kind of a lab for these actions, Turkey stands great. There are, refugees, there is still poverty in some parts of Turkey. So a lot of things that you can try here could be scaled up in other parts of the world. So the SDG Impact Accelerator is a product of this thinking, and today actually we are live. We opened our first 2 challenges. You can check the website, it's sdgia.org. And the first 2 challenges, which will be the pilot phase, are on one, non-savage sanitation, which we are doing with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and Eczacıbaşı Group, which is one of the largest sanitation systems producers based in Turkey, but globally one of the largest. And the second one is on digital ID. Both of these are critical issues for refugees, which I said we have more than 4 million in Turkey. And over the summer, what we are going to do is, we opened the call. We'll, hopefully get a few startups and scale-ups, both with products or without products, to Turkey, and guide them to test their solutions in the field here. When I say guide them, we'll make them interact with corporates here, we'll make them interact with the government agencies here, we'll make them interact with the regulators here. All of these industries are regulated. The ID, the sanitation part, so all these interactions should take place in kind of a laboratory, a sandbox setting. We'll provide that setting, and then we'll also connect them with our corporate and institutional partners in order to enable them to scale their solutions around the world. Limak Holding, which is another Turkish corporate, which has a lot of investments in developing countries, especially in energy, health, and transport industries, is one of our partners. And when this accelerator process ends, which is a 3-month boot camp, the startups will also have an opportunity to get impact investment. So we'll provide a few good alumni with equity investments, and we'll also introduce them to the larger network of impact investors that we have. And in the long run, in a year or so, we want to complement all this SDG Impact Accelerator with an impact fund. So this is kind of a new age tool to create new impact, to use public finance not only to finance things, but probably more important, to catalyze new ideas and to guide the energy of entrepreneurs to the right points that requires global solutions.
Just to make sure I understand, because it sounds very exciting and very interesting. The role of the accelerator, the public sector in this case, is to remove obstacles and
Exactly.
to guide. It's not to put money in at first.
There will be a seed money of $10,000 to $15,000.
There will be seed money.
But seed money, I think, is not the critical part. Because honestly speaking, there are hundreds or even thousands of accelerators around the world. They are all giving seed money. So that's not a differentiating factor. What you want to really do is to, as you said, to move the obstacles and to create the interaction so closely with the stakeholders, be it the government or the corporates, that something will come out of that.
I think we had a nice conversation and we had encouraged them to jump into each other's conversation, which has happened a little bit. I'm sure that we can do more of that, but before, I want to see if anybody wants and has a question from the audience. You've been sitting there listening for about 45 minutes, so your chance to question anybody in the panel. So don't be shy, please. We know we're the last panel. My good friend Sean is just going to come and close afterwards. But, okay, right there at the back, Kimberly can get a microphone there. Please introduce yourself. And if it's a direct question, it says to whom, please.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Lorik. I'm from the Development Coordination Office in Pristina, Kosovo. I have a short question for the last speaker. It was very interesting to see this SDG accelerator, but the concrete question is, how have you tackled the issue of overlapping? Because there are several initiatives, for example, that we have with youth, including from UN agencies, that serve as an accelerator for the SDGs, being that in one or more indicators. So how did you solve the problem of overlapping and coordination with your initiative that
we didn't.
Tackled? Oh, you didn't? Okay.
I don't think we have to, because as you said, there are many other initiatives. At least I know one in Denmark, one in Armenia, one in Vietnam, I think. Especially, within, can you hear me? Okay. In the UNDP or in the wider UN system. And there are also SDG labs that will be established, also including in Turkey. But all of these things, have a different angle. Some of them are country-focused, which we are not. We are global. Some of them are focused on certain themes. Some of them work with the government agencies to accelerate them. We have a more private sector focus, as I said, and the issues that we tackle, as well as the solutions that we hope our entrepreneurs will provide, are global. So we are not solving Turkey's problems per se, we are just testing the solutions here, and I think that's the different angle.
Over there, George.
Thank you very much. George Bowman from UNDP Istanbul Regional Hub. A number of the speakers have talked about issues of coordination, but there's been short on detail on how to approach this, and I think that this is an ongoing issue in terms of both trying to get finance more efficiently working around SDGs, But I wanted to see if there was perhaps, Dan, from your perspective of working previously in Serbia, how you see the governance processes around trying to make finance work more effectively. Things like single pipelines, looking for projects and these kinds of issues. And for David, in terms of the situation in Georgia, in internal governance processes in making ministries more accountable to a common vision around SDGs, this seems to be a major bottleneck in terms of moving forward on more integrated policy approaches. Perhaps if you could talk a little bit about what you see as some of the solutions for Georgia particularly. Thank you.
Tim?
Well, it's a difficult question, George. As you know, we work together there, so it is difficult. I think other speakers have talked, and I said as well in a quick way, that the coordination and strategy setting has to be the starting point. I think any government can set its priorities to anything it wants to do. It can try to land a man on the moon, or it can try to fix the water system or fix the education system. But it can't do everything at one time, all the time. I think you have to set some strategies and priorities, and in some cases that's been setting up a pipeline for infrastructure, for example. And the EU partnership and the IMF and World Bank have worked together. In the Western Balkans, you have the WBIF process for coordinating the big infrastructure projects. I think if you took that MAPS exercise again and you sat it down and you said, okay, what of these things can we solve through more government intervention? Which of these can we solve through more private sector intervention? Try to establish them. What needs a blending? I think there is a lot of competition, and we, the donors, don't do a great job. The partners don't always do a great job of cooperating ourselves. So it is important that, and I just did a round in Albania 2 weeks ago, and it's interesting to see the same donors working on the same issues and not knowing they're working on the same issues sometimes in a country which is not huge, Albania. They should all be aware. So it's up to everybody to work together and cooperate. And then getting back to this issue of blended finance, when you do get it right, it really can make the impact. And I didn't mention in my opening, but from my days in the IFI and in the EBRD, projects where we have worked well together, whether it's EBRD working with the government of Albania on agribusiness finance now, where we also have technical assistance, or we've worked with the European Union on energy efficiency in a few countries, well, almost every country now. These are cases where you have a good delivery unit, it's really scaled up. You work with, usually with commercial banks who want to finance these things. You work with technical assistance to remove some of the obstacles we talked about, and you address a real SDG issue of green finance and green climate change. And it works, so you repeat it, and then you can get out of the way because you remove the obstacles, which is what I was asking about, you remove the obstacles. So it's coordination, it's priority setting, it's strategy setting, and then it's reaching out to your partners to find the ones that are ready to finance these things, and not having them fight each other to try to do the only one thing that they all think they can do better than the other.
David?
So if I hear correctly the question, you were asking about coordination at municipal level as well, right? Yeah, we have not gone that far yet, and at the moment it's still a challenge to coordinate at central level. And there are two things to consider why it is difficult for us to move to the municipal level coordination. First, at the municipal level, local authorities' mandate is quite limited at the moment. Mandate and funds, I would say, they are very limited. So it is a very short list of directions they can spend their money at the moment. Second thing, what makes it difficult is it is difficult to you can nationalize sustainable development goals, and you have two bring it to municipal level, but it is much more difficult exercise to do. If you do that, then it can be much more efficient than it is at the central level. However, the process itself of bringing it to municipal level is very difficult. And I think it will be probably at the later stages when Georgia will be tackling this problem.
We got about 5 minutes left, and perhaps quick final reflection from the panel. But perhaps starting with Eric, just because the question of coordination with the European Union being the large donor in the world, how any comment you can do on this issue of coordination, then your final reflections, then we'll go around.
Thank you, Marcos. Yeah, on the coordination, as I said also, and from my own experience working in this kind of in this business in inverted commas for many years now, what I really witness, as I said, is that coordination happens when there is strong ownership and leadership by the authorities, and that's really a sine qua non condition. You can get donors to have goodwill, etc. It depends a lot on the individuals, but at the end of the day, if the government is there to say, this is how I want, this is what my policy is, and how we're going to work on this together. This is how it can work. This said, indeed, as EU, and I was giving our figures as EU globally, that is institutions and member states, we are also engaged in the joint programming processes. Meaning that we are strongly coordinating among ourselves in order to promote the same a coordinated response to the countries that we are supporting. So this joint programming process is exactly an endeavor to be together in our development programs, but not only in development or in aid programs as such, but also in the policy dialogue and in the political dialogue, which has a specific dimension in the region here, and especially in accession countries. So these are elements of a stronger coordination that we are bringing to the discussion at country level. But again, at country level, with national authorities at the center, that's how it works best. And then maybe as a final remark, I think that for the future, what we will need to certainly do is give an orientation to what we do and give a priority. Because if we say we need public policies, and we need the private sector, but we also know that there are market failures. Public policies are there to correct the market failures. What is happening now in terms of climate is a major market failure, and we need to correct it. And this is really what needs to happen with public finance for the future, for the years to come. And this is why the EU is committing through the package of funding for the next financial framework to specific targets to finance climate-related actions. And who knows, maybe with the new parliament that was elected yesterday, this target will increase even more. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you. Amna, some final reflection.
I'll reiterate what Erica said. I think what we've seen in our programs as well is the political will and the ownership is key to any success that we can do as a technical assistance provider. But at the same time, I think it's coordination where we've tried to use the country offices, the UNDP country offices, to at least, even if the country itself is not coordinating, they help us coordinate with the other donors, so we're complementing what they're doing rather than substituting. And again, as I said, we will all have to work together globally as a whole of globe approach, helping each other in the areas where it's the different parts that need different kind of support, and if we all get together, we can kind of complete the picture and provide the support that is needed to move towards sustainable development.
Thank you very much. So, 30 seconds.
Coordination is very important, and I think so. The story I told about the SDG Impact Accelerator is all about coordination and the convening power of both the governments as well as institutions like the UNDP matter a lot in many settings, more than the money they provide. the convening power, and bringing the sides together and coordinating them around the right actions.
Thank you. Okay, David?
Well, I think it is important that priorities are well articulated, everybody understands them, and then there is a trust to each other. Whoever is supposed to spend the money at the local level, for example, local action groups can be very good platform for attracting let's say remittances or any other flows. And regarding trust, efficiency was mentioned many times. So if there is no efficiency, there is no trust in how our money will be spent. And PIMA methodology showed that countries may be spending an equal amount of funds in infrastructure, but their assets are not growing equally. So on average, countries can improve 27% by spending more efficiently amount of their infrastructure. So if you increase efficiency by reduction of corruption, by more efficient implementation of projects, then there will be more trust and more willingness for private sector as well to participate, I think.
Well, our time's up. I hope we leave you with this notion that there are two sides of this coin. You know, the side of mobilizing more resources, private sector, public sector, but also the side of being more effective and more efficient in using public resources. And there might be a virtuous cycle on that. The more efficient and the more transparent the utilization of public resources is, more trust is created to perhaps increase the tax collection, the tax use, as well as the attraction of the private sector. So please join me in giving a hand to the panelists. Thank you very much for coming to Istanbul. Hopefully you have time to enjoy this wonderful city. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcos. Thank you to you and your guests.